Welcome to Pushing Beyond the Obvious, and I am your host Mukesh Gupta, author of the world's first business poem, Your Startup Mentor. This is a show where I bring you ideas and insights from some of the best minds in the world so that you can be a better entrepreneur and grow your business. Today's episode of Pushing Beyond the Obvious is brought to you by Skillshare, an online learning platform with over 18,000 plus classes on business, marketing, technology, and many more. Get 2 months of Skillshare for free at rmukeshgupta.com/learn.
Hi Denise, thanks for taking time and talking to us today.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks.
So I think I should first let my audience know how I come to know about you and the work that you do. I think I've been following your blog for almost about 6 months. And
wow.
That's why I came to know that the book is about to release. That's why I reached out, and so glad that we can have you on the show. So for people who don't know you, can you just quickly introduce yourself, the body of work that you've done, so that we can
Sure. So my name is Denise Lee Yohn, and I am a speaker, consultant, and writer in brand building. I wrote the book What Great Brands Do a few years ago, and I have a new book coming out called Fusion: How Integrating Brand and Culture Powers the World's Greatest Companies. So that's me.
Okay, so before we kind of move to Fusion, which is about culture and brand put together, let's talk about both brand and culture a little, independently as well. So
sure.
A lot of times, I've told you my audience is primarily entrepreneurs. So a lot of times entrepreneurs struggle when it comes to building a brand because the perception is that in order to build brand, you need to have a lot of resources, you need to have a lot of marketing budget, advertising, and they are not so clear as to know how having a brand can actually have an impact on their business itself. So maybe quick take from your previous book and your experience about the importance of building a brand and how easy or difficult it is for a small or a entrepreneur starting out to build a brand for himself or herself.
Sure. Well, first of all, I should say that brand building actually does not require a lot of money or a lot of resources. It does require discipline and focus and doing things differently. So it's brand building is something that is entirely possible, and actually I would say absolutely necessary for entrepreneurs as well as heads of larger companies as well. So I always say that your brand is what you do and how you do it. And that's because I think the official business school definition of a brand is your brand is the bundle of values and attributes that represent the value that you deliver to customers and the way that you do business. So basically they're saying your brand is what you do and how you do it. And so if you think about it and you use your brand in this way, it means that everything that you do needs to be driven and guided and aligned with this thing that you want, the value that you're creating, the thing that you want to be known for, the contribution that you want to make in the world. And so it's important for you to start with that concept. And in fact, I was talking with someone who owns a small business I was talking to yesterday, and he was saying, I'm having trouble really articulating what our purpose is. And I said, if you can't clearly articulate why you exist, why your company exists, what you're trying to contribute to the world, if you don't know that or you can't clearly articulate it, how can you expect your customers to? Or how can you expect to recruit investors or employees or business partners who want to be in business with you? So I think that it's really critical for you to have that clarity about your brand, and then that naturally kind of spills over into the culture that you cultivate in order to live out that brand.
Interesting, but see, there are a lot of the pushback that I get a lot of from a lot of my audience is also that we are growing and we want to get whatever business comes to us so that we can continue to grow. So which typically means that you're not acting on one brand promise. Which again is a bit of a challenge as well, right? So how do you counter that?
Sure. I would say that you need to have like strategic intent. You need to know the vision or what you're aiming for. So I'll take for myself, for example, I had been working in the corporate world for over 15 years before I started my own firm, and I wanted to do brand consulting, and there was a specific kind of consulting I wanted to do, specifically in the area of what this management approach I call brand as business, which is using your brand, in all areas of your business. And so I was very specific about the kinds of work I wanted to do and the kinds of clients I wanted to do it for. At the same time, I needed to eat and pay my rent and, to maintain the lifestyle that I had become accustomed to when working in the corporate world. So certainly I took on projects or engagements and clients that were not in that sweet spot when I was first starting out. But three important things. Three important things. One, I never lost sight of that vision. So it was very much like, this is what I want to stand for. And I understand that I'm doing these kind of more opportunistic things in the short term, but in the long run, I will eventually stop doing them, which I did. And so number one thing is that you need to be disciplined and at some point, cut it off. Two, I never let those opportunistic things detract me from my vision. And, I would always prioritize the opportunities that were more in line with my, with what I wanted to do. And three, I always communicated what my desired positioning was. So even though I might be accepting other projects or other assignments, I would never talk about those things and say, oh, well, I do everything. You can hire me to do whatever. I would say, this is the value, the unique value that I contribute. And if you're interested in that, I'm for you. And so, I think what I'm saying is that obviously you need to be flexible, but I also think that you need to be clear and focused and disciplined and know what you're aiming for and continue to move yourself in that direction.
So that's interesting. So the other pushback that I get from entrepreneurs is the fact that, or not a pushback, but a query or question is that, do they brand a product or a service that they are selling, or do they brand the organization, or do they brand themselves? So it's always a question that they are struggling with. So what your suggestion would be there?
Yeah. Well, I would say you should either brand yourself or your company or your idea, really. I would not brand, or I would not tie myself to a specific product, because I think you really don't know exactly what the product that you're going to sell is, how the market is going to react, what the demand is, how long lasting it is, what other new products you want to do. So you want to build in that flexibility and that ability to stretch into new things. And so I would say, don't lock yourself into a specific product brand. Now, in terms of whether you brand, your company or your idea, or whether you brand yourself, I think that's more dependent on you intend in the long run. Okay, so for me, again, I'm sorry to just talk about myself, but this is I'm the only entrepreneur that I can speak to credibly. So
actually,
when I
makes
started
sense
my
as well,
business,
because a lot of entrepreneurs will relate to what you're saying as well and what you're going through. So
good, okay. Okay. So when I started my business, two things. One is that I knew that I would never hire a bunch of people and become this larger firm. I knew my skills and my strengths, and those were to be a great contributor individually. I was not like this kind of manager or leader that was going to bring a lot of people in with me and then let them do the work. I was going to do the work. So that was one thing that influenced my decision to brand myself. And then, the second thing was that I really did think that over time, I would want to this sounds kind of strange, but I really wanted to make my name known. Like, I wanted people to know me, not necessarily any specific product or project I worked on, or even any particular topic that I spoke on or that I wrote on. And so that's why I decided for me it was important to just have my brand be Denise Lee Yohn, and everything that everything I communicate was that. There are certainly other models and other approaches, and in fact, there's a limitation to doing what I did, which is I can't really sell my business to anyone. Like no one's going to want to buy my name, and and it does limit me in that people when they hire me, they expect to work with me, so I can't like hire a junior associate and then expect a client to be okay with that. I mean, some people have managed to do that well, but I just didn't think that I could do well. So I mean, there's a growth limitation, I guess, is what I'm saying. And if you are an entrepreneur that really wants to build a huge company or really sees the potential for a large footprint, then you're probably better off branding your organization or your company. And I would say really think about, if that's the case, if that's the route you want to go, really think about what is the idea, what is the unique idea that you have that you want to share with the world, and create a brand around that, as opposed to what you do, what services you provide or what products you provide. But again, it's the broader idea.
Interesting. So let's just move a conversation to culture, right? So
sure.
A lot of times people feel that culture is something that you can't define, you can't influence too much, because you can't force people to do what you expect them to do. Plus, there is also this entire thing around culture that how do I define what kind of culture do I want to build in my organization as well?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that entire thing is around soft and wishy-washy, if I may use those words. so
sure.
How do you address that concern? And I understand the importance of culture. I mean, I talk about it, I write about it. But for people who don't, how would you communicate the value of having a specific culture to those entrepreneurs?
Yeah, okay. So culture is often considered like soft stuff. And I really have to push back on that and say it's not soft at all. It is, it produces hard results, and it also requires hard work. Okay, so the hard results part, I think that, there's a large body of work that shows that when you have more engaged employees, when you have a better workplace, when you have a culture that is productive, you get better results, such as increased revenue, increased profit. You get to attract and retain better talent. And so the data is out there, and I think that you just need to accept that that's the case. And I will say that, bottom line, if you don't build a good culture, probably the quickest way that you'll see that in your financial performance is your labor costs. You'll be spending a lot of money trying to recruit people, and turnover will just suck any money that you make out of your business. So I think culture really does produce hard results. But the second part of that is it requires hard work. And so, you made a comment earlier that I think is a common belief among a lot of people, which is, culture just kind of happens, just let it go. As long as I'm a nice, decent person, everything will work out. And again, I have to push back on that and say that's just not true. It's true that you can't dictate a culture. You can't force your people to work in a certain way. But it's just as true that you can create an environment and a context in which your desired culture can really flourish. And it's up to you as an entrepreneur and as a leader of your organization to do just that. If you don't do it, no one else is going to do it. Even if you have an HR person, or you have someone who's kind of in charge of even if you wanted to say your marketing person, or whatever, at the end of the day, if you as a leader don't prioritize it and don't make it part of your strategy and your operations, it's not going to happen. So, it doesn't. Culture doesn't happen just by itself. And I think the last thing I will say, you asked, how do you know what kind of culture you want? And that's where fusion comes in. So my book, again, Fusion, How Integrating Brand and Culture Powers the World's Greatest Companies, is all about ensuring that your culture is aligned and integrated with your brand. So most of the book comes from the standpoint that you have a pretty good idea of what you want your brand to stand for. And I think that's because, generally speaking, most entrepreneurs have some idea of, okay, this is the brand that we want to create. This is what we want to be known for. This is the value that we want to be known for providing to our customers. And so if you start from that point, then it's a matter of identifying what kind of culture is going to support and advance that brand. And in the book, I lay out a process, and it's actually based on an online assessment tool that I have as well, where you can go in and you can say, this is the kind of brand that we want, and then it'll show you the values, the core organizational values that you need to support that desired brand identity. And then from there, you can kind of say, okay, well, what kind of culture do we have currently? How far off is it from that desired culture? And then let's do the work to bring it more into alignment. So I hope that answers. It seemed like your comment had several questions in it, so I'm trying to answer as much as possible.
I'm known to do that. Sorry about that if that unsettles you.
No. I mean, you're asking great questions, and I think that that's why I wrote the book, because there is so much to culture building that I think people don't know or don't understand. I was really hoping this would be a resource to people.
So I think that gives a nice segue into the book that we are talking about. So before we even dive into what the content of the book itself is, can you tell us where and why did you write this book? What sparked the idea of writing this book?
Sure. Well, in some ways, I have been kind of writing this book for many years, because I've always worked on brand building from the inside out, in the sense that if you want to have a great brand, you need to start inside. And in fact, that's one of the first principles. That's the first principle in my first book, What Great Brands Do. Great brands start brand building by cultivating a strong brand-led culture inside the organization. So for a long time, I have been writing about and thinking about and speaking on and working with my clients on this area. But I think that it really kind of came to the forefront for two reasons. One, like personally, I actually had been working with a specific client a couple of years ago, and it became quite clear fairly early on in the engagement that their brand and culture were not aligned. And when I would talk to them and try to work on shaping their culture and really moving it into alignment, it was a very foreign concept to the company and to the leaders, and they didn't understand why I was talking about that and why it was necessary. And quite frankly, I ended up getting kind of frustrated, because I was like, look, we're not going to be able to make the progress on your brand repositioning if we don't address our culture issues. So personally, it kind of came to a forefront a couple of years ago. And then I think generally in the business environment, I think we're seeing culture being raised as a real issue for a lot of companies these days. In the U.S., there's all these incidences of sexual harassment and sexual discrimination, inequality, lack of diversity, and then I think globally, there's just a lack of employee engagement that plagues business. And I think it's come to a point where people know, leaders know that they need to be attending to their culture, but they're not quite sure how to, to the discussion we were just having. So it was for all of these reasons. Like I said, I've kind of been writing this book for years, or thinking about this book for years, but it really came to a head a couple years ago where I was like, you know what? I think I really need to write down what I know and what I've learned from all my research on this topic, so that people could know how to cultivate a healthy and sustainable and valuable culture.
Interesting. So why do you think there is this disconnect between the brands that entrepreneurs have or businesses have and the culture internally that they have?
Yeah, I think it's because most people just operate in silos, whether they like to admit it or not. I think, we're very good at compartmentalizing. So, when an entrepreneur hears culture, they think, oh, that's HR. And then when they hear brand, they think, oh, that's marketing. And they don't realize that these two things, brand and culture, are really, as Tony Hsieh, who's the head of Zappos, says, are really two sides of the same coin. Or, they are really inextricably linked, or they should be inextricably linked. And if they're not, you lose a lot in the gap that is created, whether it's risk or waste or poor performance that comes from that gap.
Interesting. So let's just dive a little bit deeper in the book content as well. So I think one of the things that you start off your book is by asking people to set their or identify what their sole purpose of existence and core values is. And you talk about a few exercises about how someone can go about doing that, because it's one thing to say, what's your sole purpose, and someone going deep inside of themselves and identifying what their sole purpose is, which a lot of times is very, very difficult. So what I really like about is that you clearly identified 3 exercises that you want people to go through, which will actually point them towards the direction that where they can find their sole purpose or maybe core values are. So if you could just elaborate those 3 exercises.
Sure. I'm so glad that you asked about those, because I really did try to, throughout the book, provide like tools and specific methods to do, so that I'm not just introducing concepts, but I'm showing you how to do it. So, and the 3 exercises that I introduced to identify your purpose, I actually have to say 2 of them I borrow from Jim Collins and Jerry Porras, who together they wrote Built to Last, and then Jim Collins actually wrote Good to Great and these other great business books. And in Built to Last, they talk about needing to identify your core ideology, which is your purpose and your values. And so they have 2 exercises. One is the 5 whys exercise. So it's basically asking the question why 5 times. So you start out, and this can be done like in a session with you and your partner, or maybe you and some key investors. And, you start out saying like, why do we exist? And, the example I think I wrote in the book is that Porras and Collins were working with a market research firm. And so they said, well, it's, to provide data about the market, It's like, well, why is that important? And so they said, well, because our clients need to understand, need to have insights about the market. Well, why is that important? And you keep on asking, why is that important, and for 5 times? And that really enables you to unpeel the onion and get to the real core purpose that is the reason behind what you do. So I think the 5 whys exercise is a very basic one, but I think it can be very revealing. The second exercise they talk about, I think it's called the random corporate serial killer exercise. And
it's an interesting name.
It is funny, but they say, again, you can do this as an executive team, or just you and your partners. Imagine that you were approached by someone who wants to take over your business. And they're going to pay you a great price for your business, and they're going to ensure good employment for all of your employees, so you don't have to worry about that. But they're basically, they tell you that after they buy your company, they're going to, end it. They're going to kill it. So that's the corporate serial killer name. And so then you have a discussion about, would you still sell your business to this person? And if not, why not? And I think that helps people get to their purpose beyond a profit motive. Because I think a lot of times, and frankly, you're in business, so you want to make money, and that's okay. That's a good, good reason to be in business. But I think you want to have a purpose that speaks to something that's more meaningful and more lasting than just profits. And so this exercise helps you think about, well, even if I could make all the money that I wanted to from this business, would I still want it to exist? And so that's a great way to get a purpose. The third exercise is one that I borrowed from psychology, and it's called a TAT test. A TAT, T-A-T, stands for Thematic Apperception Test. And this is basically using, so in psychology, sometimes they use like stick figure drawings to help their participants tell stories. And so the two stick figure drawings that you use in this test are one of your customer before your company exists or before your first product exists, and then one after. And you basically just tell a story about what that customer is thinking before you exist and after, and it really helps you. So what are they thinking? What are they doing? I think it's actually, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? And what are they doing? And through that, you really get at what is the change that you want to happen for your customers. It's not just that they buy your product, but how do you want to change the way they think and the way they feel and the way they live? And then that will help you get to your purpose. So those are just 3 exercises. There are plenty of others out there, but I think the point is to dig deep and really be very thoughtful about what is your reason for being. What is, as Steve Jobs would say, is the dent in the universe that you want to make.
Interesting. So once you identify the core purpose of your existence, from there on, how do you go about building a culture which can actually support this core value or the purpose that you exist for?
Yeah, okay. So there's one foundational step that you need to take before you get into the 5 strategies that I outline in my book. And that foundational step is to assume responsibility for it as a leader. We already kind of talked about this before, but I think it was worth re-emphasizing that the first thing you need to do is believe that it is your responsibility to drive and champion it, and to make it a priority, and to not only advance your culture in what you say, so consistently communicate it, not only in what you do in terms of role modeling, so making sure that your actions and behaviors are in line with the culture that you're trying to build, expressing the core values that you say that you want your organization to have, but then also in the strategic decisions that you make about your company. And so then that leads into the 5 strategies in part 2 of my book.
So before you move into those strategies, I think one of the things that is worth pinpointing here is the fact that a lot of times people talk about values and leaders for some reason or the other do not live them, right? That probably kills the culture there itself. You talk about 3 things, right? So action inconsistency, symbolic inconsistency, and ideological inconsistency. So if you could just explain that a little bit, because if as leaders we do not understand these and the effect it can have on culture, I think everything else that we plan to do after that will not lead to a culture that we want to build. So can you just explain on that?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that you're right. That is a really good point, because you can have a stated set of core values, but if you're not living them out as a leader and you're not leading your organization to live them out, then, they're just words on a page. And so these 3 types of inconsistency, as you said, one is action. So that is saying that, you say you value one thing, but then you really act a different way. And so this is like, your leader saying, customer first, and customers are really important, but then you never really make any investments to make the customer experience better. So that's an action inconsistency. Symbolic inconsistency is more, again, you say that something is important, but the cues and the subtle reminders or daily aspects of your organizational life don't line up with that. And so the example that I use is that I used to work with a grocery store chain they were very much into healthy food. I mean, they were really known as a health food grocery store. But then, they had junk food in the break rooms for their employees. And B, they wouldn't, when they moved into a new office building, they didn't spend the money to put a gym in the new office building. And it was like, okay, so you're telling your employees that you believe in health, and that's something you want to evangelize to your customers, but you're not even doing it for your employees. That's a symbolic inconsistency. And then third inconsistency is ideological. And this is more like when your company says that you take a stand on an issue, but then you really end up acting a different way. And maybe a good example would be given all of the controversy about gun control that's in the U.S. right now, this would be a good example. Would be a company that says that we believe in making a positive contribution to our community and being good socially responsible citizens, but then they are still supporting sales of guns to minors, or they're not really supporting gun legislation. And you're like, well, wait a minute, okay, do you really believe in this or not? So any kind of inconsistency, whether it's action, symbolic, or ideological, can really not only, I think, just make your values just meaningless, but I think they also send a message to your employees that you really don't have integrity, that you're saying one thing, but you're not really living it out. And when your employees sense that, you've basically lost their trust.
Interesting. So these are the don'ts that leaders need to really, really be aware of. So how do build a culture?
Yeah. I think a big do is to be very conscientious about your people decisions, who you fire, who you promote, who you hire, who you promote, and who you fire. And so I actually write about this in the book, because I think that you need to get the right people on your bus, right? And Jim Collins talks about this again a lot, that, more than anything, if you have so it's about getting people who use and who believe in what you're doing and who will make on-brand decisions every day. And you want to make sure you recruit those people, you want to make sure that you reward them, and you don't want to reward high performers who don't align with your culture. Because, again, that's, I think, one of the biggest cues to the rest of your organization that you don't believe in your values. If you allow people in your company who don't support your values, you're basically saying they don't matter. So a big, how do you ensure consistency is making sure your people decisions are a good reflection, an accurate reflection of the values you espouse.
Yeah, so and I think you talk about employee experience quite a lot in the book, and the importance of having the right employee experience. So why is employee experience so important in the brand culture fusion?
Yeah, well, just as customer experience requires you to design the experience to deliberately design the experience and to ongoing manage the customer experience. You really need to do that for employees as well, because your employees will only deliver to customers experiences that they have themselves. If they, just kind of like the grocery store junk food example, if they are fed a bunch of junk food and health is not something that is valued in the organization, you can't really then expect them to turn around and talk to customers about making healthy decisions, or to know about healthy food and to be able to provide an in-store experience that really promotes health. So you need to ensure that your employees are getting the experiences that help them understand what your brand is all about, and then equip and empower them to then take that knowledge and deliver it to customers. So employee experience really is the conduit to customer experience.
Interesting. So that's why I think Vineet Nair of HCL explained it best when he said employees first, customers next.
Yeah, it's always hard, because I have a client that his company is very well known for their employee experience, and people always ask him, well, is it employees first or customers first? And he says, yes. Right, because it's both, right? It's like you need to both. You can't have one without the other. They're really, just as brand and culture are mutually dependent, so is customer experience and employee experience.
So in all the work that you've done in terms of research for this book and in the process of writing this book, is there something that has come out which was surprising for you, which you really felt, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I would say what was surprising to me, I don't know if this is exactly answering your question, but one thing that really surprised me was that companies that do this really well often don't realize that they're doing it because it's just a part of how they operate. So for example, one of the companies I talk a lot about actually on employee experience is Airbnb. And Airbnb has done a phenomenal job of positioning themselves to customers, based on this idea, you belong anywhere. But then they've also created a real culture and employee experience around belonging as well. And when I interviewed the guy who headed up employee experience for many years, he just recently left the company, Mark Levy, but when he was there, I interviewed him, and I would ask him about this, and he would, he would give me all sorts of examples of the things that they were doing, but it was clear that it was just something that they just did. They didn't talk about like, oh, we need to align our brand and culture, or we need to align our customer experience and our employees. They just did it because that's how that's their ingoing philosophy or their MO. So it was surprising to me how this idea can be so intuitive and natural for some businesses and some business leaders, and then how foreign and how hard it can be for other folks to understand and believe in it. And so I really, again, hope the book helps that latter group become more like the former group.
So that's interesting because if we unpack this a little bit, so do you see any commonalities between people who do it well intuitively versus people who struggle with this?
Mm-hmm. I would say that the leaders of organizations who do this intuitively are probably they're more thoughtful and more purpose-driven people in general. They're just kind of more oriented to think and believe that to begin with. A great example that I think we all talk a lot about is like Howard Schultz, who founded Starbucks. I think that from the very beginning, he was just this very soulful guy who believed that, I'm going to nurture the world one cup of coffee at a time. And, employees in culture was very much a part of that. So, and that's not to say that I'm judging or that making a second class of people who are less thoughtful. I think that just some people, and a lot of it could be cultural also, I have to say. A lot of people just think, oh, well, I have a new product idea, or I want to run a business, or or I have a family business that's been handed down to me, and this is what I'm going to do. And they maybe they just aren't the kind of intuitively those kinds of people themselves. But I should say that doesn't mean that they can't learn how to become more intentional about culture and really prioritize it. They just need to be open to it. I think that they need to understand that there is so much growth and opportunity to brand plus culture, and so much risk and waste if they're not aligned. And as long as they understand that and are open to learning, I don't think it really matters one way or the other.
Yeah. So I think what it all boils down also based on whatever I've read in your book and the conversation so far is that, as leaders, if we are intentional about what do we want to stand for and intentional about ensuring that we act or consistently according to what we want to stand for, I think that is what the entire thing boils down to, being intentional.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a great way to put it, Cash.
Interesting. So the other thing that I also wanted to ask you about the book itself is that, in the process of writing this book, I'm sure you would have, written much more than what actually ended up in the book. So is there any strategy, is there anything that you felt should have been included in the book, but for whatever reasons, for consistency, for ease of read, for for various reasons you couldn't put it in?
Yes.
Is there some story such that?
It's funny you asked that, Mukesh, because my publisher and I had an agreement that I would write around 60,000 words, because that's kind of the average length of a business book. And, it's kind of what makes the book the size that it's supposed to be. And my first manuscript was over 70,000 words. And my publisher was like, you're going to need to cut. I was like, And I have to say that it was heartbreaking to have to cut. Like, really, think about it, 10,000 words, that's a lot of content that I had to cut. I will say that there wasn't any one specific area that I cut, but it was lots of stories. There were a lot more companies and organizations that I wanted to talk about that I ended up not being able to. And it was really hard for me to make those decisions. So for example, actually Delta Airlines was a company that I wanted to talk about, because they have this really well ingrained culture that actually was holding them back, probably back in the 80s and early 90s. But then, they kind of turned themselves around and were able to kind of use their culture in a new way to transform their business and really elevate them. And so I thought that would be a really fascinating story to tell. Well, at the end of the day, I had to cut it. So
you have the opportunity to tell the story now.
See, now you're testing me, because this is now going back nine months for me to go back. No, I will say that Delta, as I said, has always had this really very strongly based culture, very much about the Delta family. They even call themselves Delta professionals, and it's very much like they have high standard and way of working. But at the same time, I think for some of the details, that kind of family employee really that they were kind of getting stayed in ways and not accepting the innovations. The airline industry had really changed a lot, and I think that their culture was not accepting of the changes that they needed to make in order to keep up. And I'm totally blanking on the CEO's name, and I apologize to this gentleman because he did such a fabulous job. But he came in, and the very first thing he did was to lead the acquisition of Northwest Airlines. So it was an acquisition. It wasn't a merger. It was a huge deal that Delta was acquiring this company. And it was kind of his stake in the ground to say, we're doing things differently, and we're setting ourselves up both operationally as well as culturally for success. And from that moment on, I think he was really able to take all of the wonderful things about the culture, the sense of pride and the sense of teamwork, and we're in this together, but then channel it towards innovations and new partnerships and new and further acquisitions that really then help the company transform itself and become now kind of reclaim a leadership position. So I'm not doing a great job of telling the story, but this is one of those things that was like, just because your culture seems to be holding you back doesn't mean that you can't change it and not lose what is so special about it, but definitely evolve it to a better place.
So that's what I was about to say as well, that irrespective of what culture you have, if you have a good strong culture, if you apply some creativity and think through, I think there are always ways and means to, number one, build on some of the good things of the culture that you have, and to transform the parts that doesn't work. So great story. I think I'm sure there'll be some online article which also talks about this, which I can link.
Yes, there's actually a great Harvard Business Review article about the Delta turnaround, and I highly recommend it. So yes, so point people there.
I'll link that as well. So okay. Kind of we're close to the time that we have on our card. So I'll just shift our conversations to probably some of the things that I always ask all our guests.
Sure.
The first thing is there a belief that either in the process of writing this book or otherwise that you used to have, which you have changed recently, If yes, what and why did you change that belief?
Yeah, so I recently heard an interview. A friend of mine, Mitch Joel, was interviewing Chris Voss, who wrote the book, what is it called? Never Split the Difference. Yeah, it was about negotiation, right?
That's right, negotiation.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And
by the way, I listened to that conversation. It was an amazing conversation.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay, so Chris said something, and I don't know whether this was a quote from him or whether he was actually quoting someone else, but he said something like, never assume malice for what could be attributed to stupidity. Meaning that when someone does something that you just think is wrong, I think our natural reaction is to think that they have malice intent, that they are trying to do something evil, that they have some ulterior motive, and it's bad. But he was saying that a lot of times it's just stupidity, like people just don't realize what they're doing. And I think it's such a good piece of advice, or a good thing to keep in mind, because I think that even in this culture discussion, I think it would be easy for me to say that, well, leaders who don't cultivate a healthy culture, or leaders who don't align their culture and their brand together, well, they don't care, or they are just out of a profit motive, after a profit motive, or whatever. And I think what applies is that it's and I don't mean stupidity, but I just think they just don't know how to build a good culture, and so they want to do the right thing, they just don't know how to do it. And so I think it's just a good philosophy, but then I think it's a good way to view my book is, if you don't know how to build a great culture, this is the resource for you.
Interesting. So the next question that I have is, do you have any recommendation? It could be a piece of content, it could be a book, it could be a piece of art, documentary, movie, whatever, that has had a significant impact on you and that you want my audience to check out.
Yeah, and this might be a little bit sensitive, but I feel like I should say that as a person of faith, I come from a Christian background, that my faith has really informed a lot of what I do, and therefore, the Bible as a resource, as part of that faith, has really influenced my thinking. And when I think about my purpose, so we go back to this whole conversation we had about why I started my business and how I started my business. Part of it was because I believe that this is what I was called to do, that the reason why I'm put on this earth is to share this thinking and these approaches, and to help business leaders create real value in the world. I believe in business as a force for positive change in this world. I don't think it's the politicians. I don't think it's the celebrities. I think it's business people who can really make our world a better place. And I think and so I want to be a resource to business leaders, and that all comes from my faith and kind of what I believe I'm called to. So I would say that, that's the thing that has
I'd like to unpack this a little bit more. So how did you realize that this is your calling? Because a lot of times we struggle to find out what our calling is. So how did it occur to you?
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's a faith journey, and so I don't want to, impose my specific beliefs on anyone else. But I will say that some of it came from the fact that I got my dream job when I was 30 years old. Okay, so at the young age of 30, I was heading up brand and strategy for Sony Electronics. It was the most awesome job, and it was what I felt like I had wanted to do all my life. And when I got to that point, I was like, well, this is great, but I'm 30 years old, and I'm probably going to be working for at least another 30 or 40 years, so what am I going to do? I'm certainly not going to do this for the next 30 or 40 years. I mean, I love it, but, certainly I want to continue to grow and learn. So I started, and up to that point, I think I had kind of more of a self-oriented view about my career. What did I want to accomplish for myself? How much money did I want to make? What kind of impact did I want to have, just so that I would have an impact? And I think I started to look outside of myself and to say, really, what do I have to offer that no one else does? Why did God create me when he could have created, and he has created millions of other people? And so as part of my faith journey, it was really discovering the unique abilities and unique perspectives that God gave to me, and understanding, okay, well, if I shared those with people like entrepreneurs and other business leaders, that could have like a lot of impact. Like that could really change their lives, change the lives of their employees, change their communities, and maybe even change the world. And so then it became one of those things like, wow, this could be why I have all these skills and talents. And from there, then, I developed this business and developed my speaking career, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it started with me kind of saying, just achieving great career goals for the sake of achieving great career goals is not the answer. It's really not why we're here.
So it's interesting that you say this now, because I'm exactly at that point right now as we speak. I am in a good corporate job, making a decent amount of money, and starting to question whether is this all am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So exactly the same questions. And trying to
so I always say, so the framework that I use is that you want to look at the intersection of three things. What am I good at? The second is, what do I love to do? And then third is, what will people pay me to do? Basically, what would I do that's of value? And I think that when you find things that are at the intersection of those three things, that's really where your calling is. And it could be multiple callings. People sometimes are called to lots of different things. But I think that shows kind of where the unique way that God has wired you meets up with the needs of the world. And you can really kind of see, wow, I could make a difference here.
Now, I think this conversation, apart from providing a lot of value to my audience, has been of big, significant importance for me as well personally.
Good. Yeah.
Super. So the show is called Pushing Beyond the Obvious, right? So what is so obvious to you which people miss all the time?
I'm sorry, but I have to go back to this thing about brand and culture, and that it really is. You can't do one without the other. You can't say that you want to be an innovative brand, but then not have a culture where you are encouraging risk-taking and embracing failure and challenging your thinking. I mean, it's so obvious to me that you would want to have this integration, this fusing of brand and culture together, but apparently it's not so obvious to everyone else. And so, again, that's why I wrote the book.
Interesting. So one of the things that I tell people is that, the best way to find out whether someone is having a culture which is synonymous or which is kind of supporting the kind of brand that they want to build is when they talk about people trouble. So if someone is saying that it's so hard to find good people, there is a problem with the culture.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right.
So thanks a lot for taking time and talking to us. Can you please tell people where they can find more information about the work that you do, the book, and anything else?
Yeah, so please go to my website, deniseleeyohn.com. And from there, then you can get into Fusion, my book, as well as my other book, What Great Brands Do. There's all sorts of downloadable materials and resources. My blog is linked there as well. And also, I don't know if we originally connected through Twitter, but this is how I meet most of the people that I know today is through Twitter. My handle is Denise Lee Yohn. I'm really active there, and I love to meet and connect with new people. So that's another way to get a hold of me.
Thanks a lot. I think you've written a great book. All the very best for its success. And
Thank you.
think more and more entrepreneurs should read and apply the frameworks that you have so well created for the book and all the downloadable resources that you've created.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you for listening to this episode of Pushing Beyond the Obvious. If you like the show and would like to support, please head over to iTunes or wherever you are listening to this show and rate us and write a review. Till next time, have fun.